Before you abandon your spiritual journey forever, let me share what happened to Joel Goldsmith in that quiet hotel room in 1928. He was dying from tuberculosis. Doctors had given up completely, and his faith was utterly shattered. But in that moment of complete surrender and hopelessness, something extraordinary occurred that changed everything he believed about God, healing, and the very nature of reality itself. What Joel discovered wasn't another prayer technique, positive thinking method, or spiritual practice to add to his collection. It was a fundamental shift in consciousness that instantly transformed his dying body into perfect health. This wasn't gradual improvement over months or years. Within just a few hours, his lungs were completely clear, his fever was gone, and his life was totally restored through pure spiritual realization. The secret Joel uncovered that night became the foundation for thousands of documented healings worldwide over the next 4 decades. Students who learned this principle experienced miraculous recoveries from terminal illnesses, financial disasters, and broken relationships. But here's what makes this different from everything else you've tried before in your spiritual search and study. This wasn't another technique to practice or method to master. It was recognition of what had always been true, but hidden from ordinary human perception. Joel realized that every prayer, affirmation, and spiritual technique he had learned was actually working against him by reinforcing the very separation it claimed to heal. Joel realized that every prayer, affirmation, and spiritual technique he had learned was actually working against him in the most fundamental way. He discovered that trying to change conditions through spiritual effort was the very thing blocking his healing and keeping him trapped in limitation. The moment he stopped trying to fix anything and simply recognized a profound truth about his real identity, instantaneous transformation occurred. This revelation completely shattered conventional spiritual thinking that had dominated religious practice for centuries. Joel saw that most people pray to God as if God were separate from them, begging for healing as if they were disconnected from divine power. But in that hotel room, he experienced the shocking truth that the very consciousness reading these words right now is the presence and power of God itself. The problem isn't that God won't heal you or provide for you or answer your prayers. The problem is believing you're separate from God in the first place, which makes every prayer an exercise in reinforcing the very illusion that blocks demonstration. Joel's breakthrough came when he stopped trying to reach God and realized God as his own true being and essence. This shift in identity, not in circumstances, became the key to effortless manifestation and healing that would transform thousands of lives. Joel discovered that changing what you think you are automatically changes what you experience, because consciousness and its expression are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated. Joel spent the next 40 years proving this principle in the most challenging situations imaginable across every continent. Students brought him cases doctors called hopeless, financial situations that seemed completely impossible, and relationship problems that appeared beyond any possibility of repair. Yet through this one realization, breakthrough after breakthrough occurred with stunning consistency and mathematical precision. A woman with advanced cancer was told she had only days to live and should prepare for death immediately. Through Joel's teaching, she recognized her true spiritual identity beyond the physical body and experienced complete healing within just a few weeks. A businessman facing total bankruptcy applied this principle and watched his company transform into unprecedented success beyond his wildest dreams. These weren't isolated incidents or lucky coincidences, but natural results of understanding your real nature as spiritual being. The key Joel discovered is that problems exist only in the belief that you're a separate person struggling against circumstances. When you recognize yourself as divine consciousness appearing as human experience, problems dissolve because the one who seemed to have them never actually existed. This isn't philosophy or metaphysical theory, but practical mysticism with measurable results that can be verified. Joel documented case after case where this recognition produced immediate and lasting transformation in every area of human experience, proving that consciousness aligned with truth automatically demonstrates harmony. Here's the exact realization Joel experienced that night that changed everything about his understanding of spirituality. I am not a human being trying to become spiritual through effort and practice. I am spiritual being expressing as human experience right now. This shift from seeking God to recognizing yourself as God's expression changes everything instantly and permanently without exception. You stop trying to get something from God and start expressing as God's own presence and power in the world. Joel called this recognition dying daily to the personal sense of self. Every time you catch yourself believing you're separate from infinite supply, perfect health, or divine love, you simply return to the truth of your spiritual identity as God's very own consciousness and expression. The miracle isn't that circumstances change, though they often do dramatically and immediately. The miracle is that you discover the one experiencing circumstances has always been the very presence of God, never actually separate, never actually lacking, never actually in danger or threatened by any condition. This understanding becomes your permanent foundation for effortless living. Joel taught that this recognition must become as automatic as breathing, as natural as seeing, as continuous as consciousness itself. The moment you truly understand what you are, every area of your life begins reflecting that understanding through harmonious demonstration that requires no effort or struggle to maintain consistently. Let me share what happened to Margaret, one of Joel's early students who had been bedridden for 3 years with a degenerative muscle condition. Doctors offered absolutely no hope for recovery, and she had tried every spiritual method available without any success whatsoever. When Joel taught her this principle, she initially resisted because it seemed too simple to be true compared to the complex healing techniques she had been practicing. Margaret's breakthrough came during a quiet morning when she stopped trying to heal her body and simply rested in the truth of her spiritual identity beyond physical form. She wasn't Margaret with a diseased body asking God for healing. She was God's own consciousness expressing perfectly, and the body was simply a reflection of that perfect spiritual reality that had never been sick or limited. Within 6 months, Margaret was not only walking perfectly, but teaching this principle to others with remarkable success. Her recovery wasn't gradual improvement over time, but a fundamental shift in her understanding of what she actually was. The body responded to this change in consciousness because matter always reflects the level of spiritual understanding we demonstrate consistently. Margaret later said that the hardest part wasn't learning the principle, but accepting that she had always been perfect spiritual being. The illness existed only in false human belief, not in her true identity as God's consciousness. Once she stopped believing in separation from perfection, perfection naturally expressed as her experience. Robert, a successful lawyer, lost everything in a market crash and faced complete financial ruin that seemed absolutely hopeless. He came to Joel's classes desperate for a miracle, but encountered something that initially frustrated him tremendously. Instead of techniques for attracting money or manifesting wealth, Joel taught him to recognize his true identity as the very source and substance of all supply and expression. Robert's transformation began when he stopped seeing himself as a person lacking money and started recognizing himself as infinite abundance appearing in human form. This wasn't positive thinking or mental manipulation, but spiritual realization based on the actual truth of being. He began making decisions from abundance consciousness rather than fear of loss or scarcity thinking. Within 18 months, Robert had not only recovered all his losses but built greater wealth than he had ever experienced before. More importantly, he never again experienced financial anxiety because he understood his true relationship to supply. He discovered that consciousness of abundance creates abundant experience, not the other way around as most people believe. Robert became one of Joel's most successful students, demonstrating that spiritual understanding translates directly into practical results in every area of human experience. He learned that when you know yourself as the source of supply rather than someone seeking supply, demonstration becomes as natural as breathing. Sarah's marriage was ending after 20 years, and she blamed her husband's betrayal for completely destroying her happiness and sense of self-worth. Through Joel's teaching, she discovered something shocking about the nature of relationships and love that revolutionized her entire understanding. She learned that trying to get love from another person was keeping her from experiencing the infinite love that was her very essence. Sarah's healing came when she stopped seeing herself as a person lacking love and started recognizing herself as love itself in expression through individual being. This wasn't about fixing her marriage or changing her husband, but about discovering the source of fulfillment that had always been present as her true nature. She began relating from wholeness rather than need or emotional dependency. Remarkably, as Sarah's consciousness of love expanded and deepened, her husband experienced his own spontaneous transformation without any effort on her part. Their marriage not only healed completely but became deeper and more fulfilling than ever before. Sarah learned that changing her understanding of herself automatically transformed every relationship because she was no longer seeking completion from others. Sarah discovered that love is not something you get from relationships, but something you are that expresses through relationships. When you know yourself as love, every person in your experience reflects that love back to you because consciousness and its reflection are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated. These stories aren't exceptional cases or rare miracles, but natural results when you understand Joel's core teaching about the nature of identity. The principle works because it's based on the actual structure of reality, not human wishful thinking or positive mental attitude. You are not a limited person trying to demonstrate unlimited good. You are unlimited good expressing as apparently limited human experience. Every healing, every demonstration, every transformation occurs through the same recognition. You are divine consciousness appearing as individual being, never separate from the infinite perfection that is your true nature. Problems exist only in false human belief, not in spiritual reality where you actually live and move and have your being as God's very own expression. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your own spiritual identity, like this video to help others find these life-changing teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom that transforms lives, and comment sharing which healing journey resonated most deeply with your heart. Beyond the core realization, Joel taught specific practices to deepen this understanding in daily life and make it practical for ordinary human experience. The first is what he called spiritual treatment, but not the kind you might expect from traditional religious practice. This isn't asking God to change conditions, but recognizing the truth about what already exists in spiritual reality right now in this moment. When faced with any challenge, instead of trying to solve it from the human level through effort and struggle, you pause and recognize, God doesn't know this problem because God only knows perfection. Since I am God's consciousness in expression, this problem exists only in false human belief, not in my true spiritual reality where only harmony can exist. This recognition dissolves the foundation that seemed to support the problem in the first place. Joel discovered that problems persist because we acknowledge them as real and then try to overcome them through human effort. But when you recognize that infinite perfection is the only reality and you are that reality in expression, problems are revealed as false appearances that dissolve naturally. The key is consistency in this recognition, rather than intensity of effort. Joel taught that small, frequent acknowledgments of spiritual truth create more lasting transformation than occasional dramatic spiritual experiences, followed by return to human limitation thinking and problem-focused consciousness. Another powerful technique Joel taught is called dying to material sense throughout your daily experience. Throughout your day, catch yourself believing you're a material body subject to physical laws, a person with limited resources, or someone who can be hurt by external circumstances. Each time, gently return to recognizing your spiritual identity as God's consciousness in expression. This isn't denying human experience or pretending problems don't exist, but seeing them correctly from spiritual perspective. You're not a mortal being occasionally having spiritual moments during prayer or meditation. You're a spiritual being eternally expressing in what appears as human form. Your body, circumstances, and relationships are all reflection of this spiritual reality, not separate from it. Joel emphasized that this recognition must become as natural as breathing, as automatic as your heartbeat. Every thought that assumes separation from God, every fear that imagines lack or limitation, every worry that pictures yourself as vulnerable becomes an opportunity to remember and return to the truth of your divine nature expressing perfectly right now. The goal isn't to eliminate human experience, but to see it from such a high level of spiritual understanding that it harmonizes naturally without struggle. When consciousness is established in truth, truth expresses automatically through every aspect of your experience without exception. Joel also taught the practice of standing porter at the door of thought as essential spiritual discipline. Since consciousness creates experience, guarding your consciousness from false beliefs becomes the most practical activity you can engage in for transforming your life. This isn't positive thinking, but spiritual discernment based on what's actually true about God and your relationship to God. When thoughts of lack arise, you don't fight them or try to replace them, but recognize, God's supply is infinite, and I am that supply in expression. When thoughts of illness appear, you acknowledge, God's perfection is my true body. When thoughts of separation or conflict emerge, you remember, God's love is my very being, expressing as all beings. This isn't mental manipulation or auto-suggestion, but alignment with spiritual reality that already exists. You're not trying to convince yourself of something false, but remembering what's eternally true. Joel discovered that consciousness aligned with truth automatically expresses as harmonious experience, because matter always reflects the spiritual understanding we maintain consistently. The porter work becomes easier with practice as you develop the ability to recognize false thoughts immediately and return to truth without struggle. Eventually, this spiritual discernment becomes so natural that false beliefs have no power to disturb your peace or influence your demonstrations. The most advanced practice Joel taught is living from the secret place of the Most High continuously. This means conducting your entire life from the recognition that you are divine consciousness, appearing as human experience, not a human being occasionally connecting with divine consciousness through prayer or meditation sessions. From this perspective, every decision comes from infinite wisdom, because you recognize yourself as that wisdom in expression. Every action flows from perfect love, because you know yourself as that love appearing as individual being. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to demonstrate the truth of your spiritual identity, rather than evidence of separation from God. Joel lived this way for 40 years after his healing, and students worldwide learned to do the same with remarkable consistency. This isn't a philosophy to believe or a theory to study, but a reality to experience. The moment you truly recognize yourself as God's own consciousness in expression, your entire life becomes demonstration of that truth through effortless manifestation. This level of living requires complete surrender of the personal sense of self that believes it must figure out solutions and create harmony through human effort. You become a transparency through which divine perfection expresses, rather than a person trying to achieve spiritual demonstration through practice. Many students initially struggle with Joel's teaching because it seems to contradict everything they've learned about the spiritual path from traditional religious instruction. They've been taught to improve themselves, to overcome ego, to become worthy of God's love through good behavior and spiritual practice. But Joel's revelation points to something that dissolves all spiritual effort. You already are what you're seeking to become. The challenge isn't becoming spiritual, but recognizing the spirituality that's already your essential nature beyond all human concepts. The difficulty isn't reaching God, but acknowledging God as your very being. The problem isn't that you're separate from perfection, but that you believe in separation despite never actually experiencing it at any moment of your existence. Students often ask, if I'm already perfect spiritual being, why do I experience problems and limitations? Joel's answer was profound and revolutionary. The one experiencing problems is an illusion of thought, not your true identity. Your real being never experiences lack, illness, or separation, because your real being is wholeness, health, and unity, expressing perfectly always. This understanding eliminates the spiritual seeking that keeps you focused on what you believe you lack, rather than recognizing what you already are. The spiritual path transforms from effort to recognition, from becoming to being, from seeking God to expressing as God's consciousness in the world. Another common obstacle is fear of taking responsibility for being God's expression in human form. Students worry, if I'm divine consciousness, does that mean I created my problems and am responsible for my suffering? Joel taught that this question comes from still believing you're a person who became spiritual, rather than recognizing yourself as spiritual being appearing as person. The truth is that problems exist only in false human belief, not in your actual spiritual identity as God's consciousness. You didn't create them from your true being, and you don't need to solve them through human effort. You need only to stop believing in them by returning to the recognition of what you actually are, God's own perfect consciousness expressing as individual being. This shift eliminates guilt, fear, and the burden of trying to heal or improve yourself through spiritual practice. You discover that healing happens naturally when you stop believing there's anything that needs healing. Demonstration occurs effortlessly when you stop trying to demonstrate and simply be what you already are. Infinite perfection in expression. Joel emphasized that spiritual work isn't about changing yourself, but about recognizing what you've always been beneath all human concepts and beliefs. The moment you truly accept your divine nature, every area of your life begins reflecting that acceptance through harmonious experience. The most persistent challenge students face is what Joel called the activity of the carnal mind, or human reasoning. This is the constant mental commentary that insists you're a limited person facing real problems in a material world governed by physical laws. This voice seems so convincing because it's been your primary identity for so long that it feels completely natural and true. Joel taught that you don't fight this voice or try to overcome it through spiritual effort, but simply stop giving it authority over your experience. Every time it presents evidence of separation, lack, or limitation, you gently return to recognizing your true spiritual identity. This isn't a battle between good and evil, but a choice of which voice you're going to identify with and express from. The carnal mind gradually becomes quieter as you consistently choose to live from spiritual recognition rather than human belief and material reasoning. Eventually, it becomes just background noise that has no power to disturb your peace or influence your demonstrations. You discover the unshakable foundation of consciousness that is your actual identity beneath all mental activity. Joel warned that the carnal mind will present very convincing arguments for why spiritual truth can't be true in your particular situation. The key is learning to recognize these arguments as coming from false identity rather than spiritual wisdom, and choosing truth regardless of how convincing the material evidence appears. Students often wonder how long this transformation takes and when they can expect to see results in their experience. Joel's answer was always the same. It takes as long as it takes you to truly accept what you already are. Some experience instant breakthroughs like Joel did in that hotel room. Others require months or years of consistent practice, but every student who persists eventually experiences undeniable proof of their spiritual identity. The key is consistency rather than intensity in spiritual practice. Joel emphasized daily recognition of your true nature over dramatic spiritual experiences or peak moments. Small, consistent acknowledgments of your divine identity create more lasting transformation than occasional intense spiritual practices, followed by return to human limitation thinking. Joel taught that spiritual progress isn't measured by how often you have mystical experiences, but by how consistently you live from the recognition of your divine nature. The goal is to make spiritual consciousness your normal state, rather than something you access occasionally through prayer or meditation. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak directly to your heart and inspire transformation, like this video to support others finding these teachings, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices that change lives, and comment sharing which obstacle you're ready to transform now. Advanced students learn to live from what Joel called the fourth dimension of life, or pure spiritual consciousness. This is existence from the standpoint where matter, time, and space are recognized as mental constructs rather than governing realities. From this dimension, instantaneous healing and manifestation become natural rather than miraculous because you're operating from the level where these things originate. Joel demonstrated this repeatedly throughout his teaching career with thousands of witnesses. Students witnessed him dissolve storms through recognition of spiritual harmony, heal incurable diseases through acknowledgement of perfect spiritual embodiment, and transform desperate situations through understanding of divine order expressing in human experience without any human intervention or effort. This isn't power over matter, but recognition that matter is consciousness appearing in form, and form has no existence apart from the consciousness that appears as form. When consciousness changes through spiritual understanding, form automatically reflects that change because consciousness and its expression are one indivisible reality that cannot be separated or opposed. Living from the fourth dimension means seeing through material appearances to spiritual reality in every situation. You recognize that what appears as problem is actually opportunity for spiritual demonstration. What appears as limitation is actually invitation to recognize infinite possibility. Living from the fourth dimension means making decisions based on spiritual reality rather than material appearances or human reasoning. Joel taught students to ask in every situation, what would infinite wisdom do? What would perfect love express? How would divine order appear in this circumstance? Then trust that wisdom, love, and order to express through their consciousness without trying to figure out details. This requires releasing the belief that you must figure out solutions through human reasoning and mental effort. Instead, you rest in the recognition that divine intelligence is your very mind, and perfect solutions emerge naturally from that intelligence without mental strain or worry about outcomes. You become a transparency for divine wisdom rather than a person trying to be wise. Students discovered that this approach produces far better results than human planning, while eliminating the stress and anxiety that comes from believing you're personally responsible for creating harmony in your experience. You learn to let divine intelligence think through you rather than trying to think your way to spiritual demonstration. Joel emphasized that this isn't passivity but active cooperation with divine intelligence that knows exactly what needs to happen in every situation. Your role is to maintain spiritual consciousness and trust infinite wisdom to express perfect solutions through that consciousness. Joel's most advanced students learn to see every person and situation from the fourth dimension perspective, rather than human judgment. Instead of relating to others as material beings with human problems and limitations, they recognized everyone as divine consciousness appearing in individual form, regardless of external appearances or behavior patterns that suggested otherwise. This recognition transforms all relationships from human interaction to spiritual communion, where you're relating to the Christ presence in everyone. You stop trying to change others and start seeing the divine nature that is their true identity. Remarkably, this shift in your perception often triggers transformation in others because you're relating to their highest spiritual nature rather than their temporary human condition. Joel taught that this is the ultimate healing work, seeing spiritual perfection everywhere, acknowledging divine presence in everyone, and recognizing God's expression in every situation regardless of appearances. This isn't denial of human experience, but perception from such a high level of consciousness that human experience harmonizes naturally without effort. When you consistently see others from their spiritual identity rather than their human behavior, you become a healing presence that draws out their highest nature. This is how Jesus healed and how every spiritual master throughout history demonstrated transformation in others. The pinnacle of Joel's teaching is what he called living in the Word, or existing in such constant recognition of spiritual truth that your consciousness automatically demonstrates harmony without conscious effort. Your very presence becomes a healing influence wherever you go, because you're established in the recognition of universal perfection, expressing everywhere. Students who achieve this level don't practice spiritual principles. They embody spiritual reality as their natural state of being. They don't treat problems. They recognize the absence of problems in true spiritual existence. They don't manifest good. They express the infinite good that is their essential nature continuously and effortlessly through every thought, word, and action. Joel lived this way for the last decades of his life, and thousands of students experienced healing simply by being in his presence or reading his words. He demonstrated that when consciousness is established in spiritual truth, that truth expresses automatically through every aspect of human experience without exception. This level of spiritual living becomes possible when you completely surrender the personal sense of self that believes it must do something to create harmony. You become so transparent to divine consciousness that it flows through you naturally, blessing everyone and everything in your experience. As you approach mastery of Joel's teaching, you discover something profound about the nature of spiritual work that revolutionizes your entire approach. You realize that you've never actually been a human being learning to become spiritual through effort and practice. You've always been a spiritual being learning to express that spirituality clearly through human experience without interference from false beliefs. This recognition eliminates the sense of spiritual seeking, because you understand that what you were seeking has always been your essential nature. There's nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, and no one to become. There's only the ongoing recognition and expression of what you eternally are, God's own perfect consciousness appearing as individual being. The spiritual path transforms from effort to recognition, from becoming to being, from seeking God to expressing as God's consciousness in the world. Every day becomes an opportunity to demonstrate more clearly the divine perfection that is your true identity, rather than an attempt to overcome human limitation through spiritual practice. Joel taught that the ultimate spiritual realization is discovering that you are the very thing you've been seeking. God isn't something outside yourself that you must reach or attain. God is your very own consciousness, and spiritual demonstration is simply letting that divine consciousness express naturally, without human interference. Joel's ultimate message was that Christ consciousness isn't something that comes to you occasionally during peak spiritual experiences, but something that you are permanently as your true identity. The consciousness reading these words right now is the same consciousness that Jesus demonstrated, that Buddha expressed, that every spiritual master throughout history recognized as their true identity. The only difference between you and the great spiritual teachers is the degree to which you recognize and express this truth consistently in daily life. They weren't special beings with unique divine connection or mystical powers. They were human beings who recognized their divine nature and lived from that recognition regardless of external circumstances or challenges. This understanding democratizes spirituality completely and eliminates spiritual hierarchy or specialness. You don't need special initiation, years of training, or exceptional spiritual gifts. You need only the willingness to recognize what you already are and to live from that recognition with increasing consistency and clarity every day. Joel proved that any person willing to accept their divine nature can demonstrate the same healing, supply, and harmony that characterized the lives of history's greatest spiritual teachers. The Christ is not a person, but consciousness, and that consciousness is equally present as every individual being. The practical result of Joel's teaching is a life of effortless harmony where problems dissolve before they fully form, where supply appears before you recognize the need, where healing occurs naturally because there's never been anything that needed healing in your true spiritual identity as God's perfect expression. This isn't a fantasy or spiritual ideal, but the natural expression of consciousness aligned with truth about its own nature. When you know yourself as divine consciousness appearing as human experience, that consciousness automatically expresses as perfect health, abundant supply, harmonious relationships, and joyful living, because these are its natural qualities that cannot be suppressed or limited. Students worldwide continue to demonstrate this truth more than 40 years after Joel's passing, proving that his teaching points to eternal spiritual principles rather than personal charisma or temporary methods. The truth he discovered is available to every consciousness willing to recognize and accept its divine nature. Joel's legacy isn't a new religion or spiritual system, but the rediscovery of what every human being actually is beneath all concepts and beliefs about limitation. His teaching removes everything that seems to stand between you and direct experience of your divine nature. Before you give up on spirituality forever, remember Joel's profound realization in that hotel room that changed everything. You are not seeking God because you are not separate from God. You are God's own consciousness appearing as individual being, expressing perfectly in every moment, regardless of external appearances or temporary human conditions that suggest otherwise. This recognition doesn't require faith, belief, or spiritual effort to make it true. It requires only the willingness to stop believing in separation and to acknowledge what has always been true. You are divine being having a human experience, not human being occasionally connecting with divine presence through prayer or spiritual practice. The moment you truly accept this truth about yourself, every area of your life begins reflecting that acceptance through harmonious demonstration. You discover that you are the very presence and power you've been seeking, and that everything you need for perfect living is already established in consciousness as your divine inheritance. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets and you're ready to live from your true identity, like this video to help others discover their divine nature, subscribe for more transformative teachings that change lives, and comment "I am transformed" to confirm your commitment to living from spiritual truth.